To celebrate the annual coming-of-age ceremony, the village chief hosts a massive feast in his own courtyard. Among the guests is Officer Ramon, who sneaks away from patrol duty just long enough to pull out a ring. He's finally ready to propose to his girlfriend, Ningxi. But before he can even say a word, his phone rings. It's the police chief. They've just confiscated a shipment of illegal fireworks, and Ramon's needed on-site immediately. With no choice, Ramon stuffs the ring back into his pocket, apologizes to Ningxi, and rushes out of the party. But the moment he leaves, chaos erupts. A speeding car suddenly crashes straight into the crowd, finally coming to a stop only after slamming into a parked pickup truck. The village chief runs over, furious, helping an injured villager to his feet before storming up to confront the reckless driver. But when he yanks open the door, he finds the man inside trembling violently. Before the chief can make sense of what's going on, the driver lunges forward, grabs him by the shoulders, and sinks his teeth straight into his neck. The villagers freeze in shock as their chief collapses, lifeless, into the field. What the hell just happened? To find out, we need to rewind the clock. 5 hours earlier, a struggling pharmaceutical company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Until, after 3 long months of desperate research, they finally created something groundbreaking, a brand new drug. Before sending it off for official testing, the head of research decided to prepare 2 sample doses, one for the company's owner and one for an important client. Now, the owner was a man pushing 60, but he'd married a stunningly young wife named Karina, the kind of woman whose beauty couldn't quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes. When the samples arrived, the old man didn't hesitate for a second. He swallowed 1 pill on the spot. Just then, noise erupted outside the house. Turned out his daughter and her family had come to visit. Karina quickly ran out to greet them. But the daughter, Kenz, clearly wasn't thrilled to see her young stepmother. Meanwhile, the boss had just stepped out of the shower, and when he looked into the mirror, he froze. The wrinkles on his forehead were gone. The gray hair vanished. The man staring back looked 20, maybe 30 years younger. Overwhelmed with excitement, he ran to find Karina, barely able to contain himself. He told her that the company's latest creation wasn't just a new drug, it was the elixir of youth. But while the old man was celebrating his newfound miracle, his daughter Kenz was busy plotting something else. Together with her husband, she'd been planning to sell off the entire pharmaceutical company for profit. They'd already filmed a slick promotional video, and were discussing how to split the money with her brother, Cardin. The only problem? Cardin couldn't care less about any of it. He spent all day locked in his room, headphones on, glued to his favorite shooting games, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break loose. When the newly rejuvenated boss walked into the main hall, everyone froze in disbelief. Rudy, his son-in-law, thought maybe the old man had just dyed his hair, but the boss didn't bother explaining. Instead, with an oddly confident smile, he announced that he was canceling the plan to sell the pharmaceutical company. His reason? The miracle drug they had just developed, the so-called elixir of youth. But his daughter, Kenz, wasn't having it. She'd already made her plans. Once the sale went through, she'd take the money, divorce her cheating husband, and start a new life with her son. She hated everything around her. Her unfaithful husband, her best friend who'd married her father, and this twisted, poisonous family dynamic. Tempers flared. The room exploded into chaos. The boss's face grew darker and darker, veins bulging across his neck as his anger boiled over. He shouted for everyone to shut up, and began tearing into each of them one by one. But as his fury built, something else began to change. His veins thickened, his face twisted, and suddenly, blood started spilling from his mouth. A moment later, he collapsed, motionless. Rudy rushed forward, checked for a pulse, and froze. The old man's heart had stopped. Everyone panicked, fumbling to call an ambulance. But before they could even process what was happening, the boss sat straight up. His eyes were ghostly pale, and a guttural growl rumbled from deep in his throat. The butler took a cautious step forward, and in the next instant, the old man lunged at him like an animal. The bearded driver rushed over to help, but before he could even react, the mutated boss tackled him to the ground. He didn't get bitten, but his face was splattered with the boss's blood. Cardin ran forward to pull his father away, but he tripped and fell. As the old man lunged toward him, Cardin grabbed a replica crossbow lying nearby and, without thinking, pulled the trigger. The arrow went straight through his father's skull. The once powerful man collapsed instantly, motionless. Everyone froze in shock, the room filled with the sound of quiet sobbing. Only Rudy managed to keep his head straight. He shouted for the driver to rush to the police station and get help, because the entire mansion had descended into chaos. Meanwhile, Cardin sat in the car, blaming himself for killing his father. But inside the house, things were getting worse. The butler, who'd been bitten, was still bleeding from his neck. As the others argued about how to get him to a hospital, he suddenly stood up. His movements were stiff and unnatural, exactly like the boss's before. And the moment he saw someone still alive, he lunged straight at them. One of the maids tried to pull him back, but she was instantly taken down and torn apart. Rudy finally realized how bad things were. He grabbed his son and ran toward the exit. Out in the car, Kins was still trying to comfort her brother when something strange caught her eye. Out in the courtyard, a maid was savagely biting the gardener's neck. Kins stepped out, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, until she suddenly came face to face with a twisted, blood-covered face staring right at her. Luckily, Cardin started the car just in time, running the mutated maid over and pinning her beneath the wheels. Kins barely had time to be scared. She sprinted back into the hall, only to find her husband and son gone. Blood was smeared all over the floor, and no matter how many times she called, no one answered. Then, out of nowhere, another mutated maid staggered out of a bedroom. Kins and Cardin didn't think twice. They turned and ran. When they reached the car, the one they'd run over earlier had vanished. Just as they exchanged confused looks, the maid suddenly appeared again, dragging half her mangled body across the ground, crawling toward them at terrifying speed. Cardin kicked her away with all his strength, and the two realized this place was far too dangerous to stay. They had no choice but to escape. Meanwhile, the driver who'd gone to the police was starting to feel strange. The blood splattered on his face had begun seeping into his skin, and the infection was spreading fast. As he passed the village chief's house, his body twitched uncontrollably, and the car slammed straight into the front truck. When the chief came outside to check, the driver was already gone, replaced by a snarling corpse that lunged forward and tore him apart. The village erupted in panic as the infection spread through the crowd like wildfire. Back at the mansion, Rudy and the others were still running for their lives, dodging the zombie butler who refused to die. They tried hiding around a pickup truck, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. Just when it seemed like they might outsmart the creature, Rudy's phone started ringing. The sound gave them away instantly. The zombie butler roared and lunged toward them, forcing everyone to fight back with everything they had, barely managing to keep the young boy safe from its grasp. Just as both sides were locked in a deadly standoff, the sky suddenly broke open and heavy rain began to pour. For some reason, the zombie butler froze in place, completely motionless, like the rain had short-circuited his body. Everyone stood there in disbelief for a split second, then bolted as fast as they could. Rudy fumbled for his phone. Turns out, the call that nearly got them all killed earlier was from his wife, Kins. When she learned their son was still alive, she finally let out a sigh of relief. But out here in the middle of nowhere, it was hard to find each other's exact location. So they agreed to meet at the village chief's house, the nearest landmark they both knew. However, when Rudy and his group arrived first, what they found made their blood run cold. Everyone who had been at the party earlier was now a zombie. They immediately turned around to run, but one of their group, the woman in yellow, lagged behind. A zombie lunged out from the shadows and bit deep into her shoulder. Her screams drew even more of them. Within seconds, they were surrounded. There was no way to fight that many, so they rushed into the chief's house and barricaded themselves inside. Luckily, the horde outside seemed too busy feasting to notice them for now. The room was quiet, eerily safe, as Rudy locked the front door and tried to catch his breath. Then his phone rang again. It was Kins. She and her brother had made it to the village, but there was a problem. The front yard of the chief's house was swarming with zombies. Desperate to reunite with her son, Kins told Rudy to honk the car horn, so she could track the sound and find them through the chaos. But what they didn't know was that these zombies were extremely sensitive to sound. The moment the car horn blared, they reacted like sharks catching the scent of blood. Cardin had no choice. He slammed on the gas and sped through the village, trying to lure the horde away. Behind him, the undead chased relentlessly, tearing through anyone unlucky enough to be in their path. But for Rudy and the others still trapped at the village chief's house, the pressure suddenly lifted. They hurried out into the courtyard, just in time to see their driver's car screech to a stop nearby. Unfortunately, the front of the vehicle was completely smashed in. It wouldn't start again. Rudy tried to call his wife for help, but before he could even dial, a zombie came crawling out from the rice field. The group sprinted toward the village gate. On the way, they spotted a small wooden cabin. Karina quickly pulled her grandson inside, while Rudy stayed behind to hold off the monsters. The two huddled together, watching the door with bated breath, until finally, Rudy appeared. He was covered in blood, but alive. He'd managed to kill the zombie, but his arm had been bitten. Realizing his time was running out, Rudy crouched down beside his son and told him, If I'm gone, you have to protect your mother, okay? Then, without another word, he stood up and turned back toward the door. By the time Karina looked again, he had already turned. The zombie version of Rudy lunged at them, forcing Karina to fight with everything she had left. She used the cabin door to trap him, and with one final push, she sent him crashing into an iron rod. The grandmother and grandson had survived, at least for now. But while Karina and the boy were barely holding on, Kins was facing a brand new nightmare. All she could think about was finding her son. Cardin tried to take a back road toward the village chief's house, but he didn't see the truck coming straight at them. It was too late to turn. Their car flipped off the road, slamming onto its side. The truck driver jumped out in a panic, terrified he might have killed someone. Luckily, both Kins and Cardin were still alive, but that short delay was all it took for the zombie horde to catch up. The villagers riding in the truck had been heading to the feast at the chief's house, but instead, they became the feast. Within seconds, the driver froze in horror as the undead swarmed him, tearing him apart before he could even scream. Kins turned pale as a sheet. Thankfully, the police station wasn't far ahead. Inside, a few officers were busy debating what to do with the confiscated fireworks. The siblings slammed the door shut behind them, gasping for air, warning that dozens, maybe hundreds, of zombies were on their way. The police chief immediately took charge, shouting for his men to move out and check the scene, leaving Officer Ramon behind to protect Kins and her brother. But when the chief and his team arrived at the crash site, they found something waiting that was far more ruthless than anything they'd ever faced. The undead swarmed them without mercy. Several officers were torn apart on the spot, while the mustache police chief barely had time to raise his gun and fire a few desperate shots. Meanwhile, back at the villager's house, Karina and her grandson suddenly heard footsteps outside the door. But thankfully, it wasn't the undead. It was Ningxi, the woman who'd escaped the feast at the village chief's house. Turns out, this wooden cabin was actually her home. Ningxi rushed to call her boyfriend Ramon, but before she could even explain what was going on, he hung up. Over at the police station, the mustache chief had somehow made it out alive. The others quickly brought him inside, barricading the doors as the undead slammed against the walls. But as soon as they caught their breath, they realized something terrible. The police chief had been bitten. Kins immediately pointed out that he'd turn any second now, but Ramon refused to believe it, frantically dialing for an ambulance, still clinging to hope. Then, without warning, the chief began to twitch. He struggled to his feet. Cardin reacted fast, grabbing a police pistol and firing. But his aim was off. The bullet hit the chief's shoulder, not his head, and the infected officer went down, wounded but not dead. Ramon nearly got bitten as the man lunged again. Only now did he truly understand what they were dealing with. This wasn't an infection. It was the end of humanity. Cardin and Kins rushed in to help, working together with Ramon to subdue the chief. After a desperate struggle, they finally managed to drag him into a holding cage and slam it shut. But outside the police station, things were getting worse by the second. A massive horde of zombies had already gathered. Surprisingly, Cardin, the quiet, game-addicted shut-in, turned out to be the calmest one there. He told Ramon to call for backup right away. Meanwhile, Kins couldn't stop worrying about her son. When she finally heard that the boy was hiding safely at Ningxia's house, she nearly broke down in tears of relief. But when she learned that her husband had turned into one of those things, she didn't even cry, just frowned slightly, as if she'd already accepted it. Cardin quickly grabbed the phone, telling his nephew to stay put, lock the doors, and no matter what happens, don't go outside. Once help arrived, they'd rush straight over to reunite with him. Inside the cage, the infected police chief kept growling and slamming against the bars, his roars echoing through the halls and drawing even more zombies toward the building. Ramon had no choice but to brace the door with everything he had. And then, the police radio crackled to life. A voice came through, saying that the rescue team had arrived at the village perimeter. But before anyone could respond, they heard screams. Then silence. The radio went dead. The three of them froze, realizing the awful truth. The rescue team had been wiped out before even reaching the station. Hope was gone. They climbed up to the attic, trying to get a better view. But all they could see outside were waves of zombies stretching as far as the eye could see. Kins knew there was no way out. So she made one last call to Karina, her voice trembling, telling her the rescue was gone, and they were surrounded. For now, she didn't care about their feud. All she wanted was for Karina to take care of her son. Meanwhile, Cardin and the others were still trying to figure out a way to escape. That's when they realized something crucial. The zombies were extremely sensitive to sound. An idea struck Ramon. He remembered the large stash of fireworks they had seized earlier. Cautiously, he lit one of the skyrockets. Just as he hoped, The loud explosion drew the zombies' attention. They all turned and shuffled toward the noise. Not far away, a few motorcycles were parked. If they could reach them, they could ride straight to Ningxia's house. The three of them rushed to the armory to grab weapons. Carden, who had loved shooting games since he was a kid, was no stranger to firearms. He quickly explained the basics to Kenz, making sure she knew how to handle herself. Armed and ready, they grabbed more fireworks and carefully crept to the front hall. Sliding the door open just a crack, Ramon set off another firework. The massive burst of light and sound worked perfectly. The zombies were lured away. Seizing the moment, the trio charged out of the station, weapons in hand. But luck ran out. A few zombies they hadn't noticed were still ahead. Ramon instinctively fired his gun, but the deafening blast just drew even more zombies back toward them. They had no choice but to huddle behind their riot shields for cover. Bullets flew until Ramon and Carden emptied their magazines. Yet the horde only seemed to grow. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a thunderclap echoed across the sky. Every zombie froze mid-step, lifting their heads as torrential rain poured down. They stood there, motionless. Carden and the others hesitated, curiosity mixing with caution as they stepped outside. Meanwhile, Karina and her group were startled by a loud crash. It was the zombified Rudy, who had broken free from the iron bars. The thundering impact drew the attention of nearby zombies as well. But the sudden downpour seemed to freeze time itself. Karina realized this was the perfect moment to escape. As they tried to start the motorcycles, Rudy smashed through the door panel. All three of them screamed in shock, slamming the throttle to the floor, and barely managed to burst out of the wooden house before Rudy could catch up. At the same time, Kenz and her group were still weaving through the zombie horde. But the heavy rain didn't last long. It came fast and went just as quickly. Ramon and Carden suddenly found themselves surrounded by zombies. Luckily, they had bulletproof vests, but they had to act fast, drawing the horde's attention to give Kenz a chance to drive. They banged and shouted, desperately making noise, and once Kenz had gotten far enough, the two reluctantly retreated back to the police station. Kenz sped forward, her heart pounding, and just as the zombies closed in, she leapt into a truck. But panic setting quickly, she realized she didn't actually know how to drive. Several attempts later, the engine refused to start. At that moment, Karina and the others arrived, riding an electric vehicle. Kenz spotted them from a distance and quickly honked to warn them. But the zombies didn't care. They charged straight at the three of them. In a desperate move, Kenz lit a firework, finally drawing the zombies away to a safe distance. After a whole day of running for their lives, Kenz finally reunited with her son. But before they could even exchange words, more zombies began to gather around them. The group scrambled into the truck's cabin. Luckily, Karina wasn't new to riding. She expertly started the vehicle, slammed the accelerator, and drove straight through the zombie horde. But tragedy struck just as they neared the police station. The brakes failed. The truck barreled straight into the station. Fortunately, Kenz and the others weren't hurt. Carden, however, didn't react in time and got one leg pinned under the wheel. Karina tried to reverse the truck, only to notice more zombies pouring in through the broken entrance. Ramon quickly raised his gun and started shooting, but the zombies kept coming, relentless and unending. Luckily, Karina noticed that the back door of the police station was free of zombies and quickly called everyone to escape through it. Ramon fought his way out with his girlfriend, shooting as they retreated, but in all the chaos, he forgot about the zombified police chief locked in the cage. Poor Ningxi had her arm bitten, and Ramon, overwhelmed with grief, kept firing until he was finally taken down by the zombies. Yet in that moment, his mind was calm. He quietly pulled the ring he hadn't had a chance to give out from his pocket. He and Ningxi shared a fleeting, bittersweet smile, and then he slowly closed his eyes. Meanwhile, Carden had emptied his gun and saw the zombies flooding into the station. He shouted for his sister to run, but when she refused to leave, he made a bold move. He lit a firework. With a truck leaking fuel nearby, Kenz had no choice but to grab her son and flee the station. As the zombies closed in, Carden threw the firework into the crowd. The explosive blaze lit up the night sky, with sparks flying everywhere, and instantly incinerated the surrounding zombies. Karina and the others managed to escape the police station safely, and the motorcycles parked by the roadside were still usable. But Kenz's face was filled with worry, knowing their fight for survival wasn't over yet. It turns out that during the recent struggle, Kenz had been bitten by a zombie. Knowing the outcome was inevitable, she could only say a reluctant goodbye to her son. Suddenly, more zombies surged out from the firelight. She shouted for everyone to run, then quickly lit another firework. Using the same trick, she managed to lure the zombies away, but this time, it cost her. By the time dawn came, Karina had finally escaped the village with her grandson. What they didn't know was that the zombified butler was also making his way out of the village. Meanwhile, in the bustling city, a major client preparing to acquire the pharmaceutical company was still wondering why they couldn't reach the boss, only to find a bottle of the long-life drug sample, already empty, sitting on the desk. It seems the story of the zombie virus wasn't over just yet. And that wraps up the Elixir. This zombie film is one of the year's top releases, a solid watch, rivaling even the most hyped Train to Busan-style series. I strongly recommend checking out the full movie. Alright, that's it for today. If you enjoyed this recap, make sure to stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.